Welcome to Living Transplant, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the transplant program at Toronto General Hospital and brings you open and honest conversations about the transplant experience. My name is Candace, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Centre for Living Organ Donation. I'm also a kidney transplant recipient. This is where I developed my passion to support others in their journey to navigate the world of transplant. Full disclosure, I'm not a physician, and I'm not here to give you medical advice. Think of me as your guide through the world of transplant to educate, inspire, pique your curiosity, and fuel your passion. Living Transplant will show you the world of transplant like you've never seen it before. Welcome back to the Living Transplant podcast. Today, I am joined by a couple who really needs no introduction, Joanne Kearney and Brendan Cahill. Joanne and Brendan went on a remarkable journey together where Brendan donated his kidney to a stranger and Joanne received one from a stranger through the kidney paired donation program. Following their successful surgeries, Joanne and Brendan, together with their families, co-founded the Centre for Living Organ Donation. Later, we will be joined by Dr. Atul Humar, the director of the Ajmera Transplant Centre and the University Health Network, at one of the largest transplant programs in North America. And he is also the director of the University of Toronto Transplant Institute. So Joanne and Brendan, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me as guest host today.
Thanks so much for having us, Candace. I love the Living Transplant podcast. I've been a listener from day one, so we're really honored to be on it today with you. And we feel people know our story, so hopefully they're not sick of us yet.
I don't think so. And I'm excited to have you guys both here to tell your story in your way. Let's get started. I guess we'll start all the way at the beginning. Joanne, if you could tell us just a little bit about your kidney diagnosis.
Sure. So I was diagnosed with kidney disease at the age of 4 or 5. They found it because I had a series of urinary tract infections as a little kid, and my GP at the time said that's unusual and referred me to sick kids. And a year later, I was having my left kidney removed. And so the early days of the disease had started to scar my right kidney and completely scarred my left. So I had a left nephrectomy at 5, and then I lived on one tiny little blood pressure medication from that time through to my transplant, a bit on and off. And it let me leave like a very quote unquote normal life. I knew I had kidney disease. I went to sick kids every 6 months or every year later on. And then later I transferred over to UHN. And as a kid, I thought that going to the hospital, having had a surgery, having had to spend time made me lucky in some ways. Maybe that's weird, but I felt stronger for it. I felt like I'd run the halls of sick kids and tell stories of my time there and see the surgeons walking by. And I had a really lovely doctor, Dr. Geary, who saw me until I was 19. And I didn't want to leave sick kids. Yeah. And I remember him telling me at some point in the time, because my roommate in the hospital, she had a transplant. So I asked a lot of questions as a 5-year-old, what does that mean? Am I having one? And I wasn't. And I remember him telling me that maybe you'll have one, but you'll be 40, like a really long time from now. And it felt so long away that it wasn't part of my living with kidney disease. And then when I transferred over to I went from being a 19-year-old whose parents came to my appointments with me at sick kids. And I finally thought, UHN, I got to do this alone. I got to walk these big halls. And I found a very lovely family through Dr. Jessel and the kidney clinics at UHN. And I continue to be seen there once a year, very little impact on my life, and was aware with it, managed my diet a little bit, took that great blood pressure medication, and off I went.
And what was that? You spoke a little bit about it, but transferring from that sick kids team, my friends who grew up in sick kids, it's such a family oriented place. And it's just such a community to then going into an adult clinic. And now you are part of a very large group of people who you may have different nurses and different people that you see who may not know as much about you that staff at sick kids knew. What was that like, transferring to be the big adult at UHN?
I don't remember it being daunting. I remember it being a decision. Like we're working with sick kids. They said at the time, maybe I'm aging myself. I still did grade 13. And so I was over 18 and still going to sick kids. They said, why don't we transition you when you're off to university? So I had moved to Montreal. I was going to McGill, and I remember coming home and scheduling an appointment for when I was home from school and going the first time on my own and going to say, okay, this is a new transition, but it was all part of me, that life transition you're going through when I was going off to university. And so I do remember walking the halls and being like, oh, I don't know where I'm going here. And it's like a very big hospital. But then as soon as I had my first appointment with Dr. Jessel, she knew Dr. Geary very well. And true, everyone who's Irish knows someone who's Irish. Both of them happen to be of Irish backgrounds themselves. So there was this very familial feel to it. And I just clicked really well with Dr. Jessel. And she was a wonderful nephrologist who said, I'm here to keep your kidneys functioning and living a lifestyle where you're not impacted by it. And we were together very successful for over a decade. So UHN was big, but the kidney world was small. It felt to me. So I felt that it was time to leave sick kids.
Wow. And I guess maybe the title of this episode will end up being like the Irish group, because Coughlin is also, we have Irish descent as well. So
yeah, there we go. We're everywhere.
All of the Irish together.
When we were in the hospital, my parents, my family would come visit all Irish. Brendan's family would come visit all Irish. The attending or the resident who was looking after me, she was Irish. There was, and then there's so many, UHN is such a cosmopolitan hospital that there was a lot of different Irish accents that you can't escape us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's amazing. So going back to talking about your transition to UHN. So you're 19. At what point did you meet the wonderful man who's with us today?
Oh, that's a complicated question. When did we meet, Brenda?
2006 at a party.
Nice.
I remember.
Yeah. Back to the Irish thing. Our families knew each other. Our brothers played football together. Brendan and my sister were at a law firm together. Wow. So I think I was the last of your family to meet. I had all your siblings.
Yeah.
And when did you start officially dating, becoming a pair?
September 2008.
September 2008.
Yeah.
We were good friends first, and then started dating in 2008. And now we've been married 10 years. We got married in 2012.
Amazing. Congrats. I'm guessing there's some kind of celebration that may be happening for your Big 10. Hopefully.
Yeah, it's basically a year of celebration. Got lots to celebrate this year, so we're working on a few ideas.
That's fantastic. So when you first met Joanne, was she very upfront about her kidney journey? Did you learn about that quickly, or was that kind of an evolving learning process for you?
Yeah, I learned it quite quickly. And yeah, it wasn't very long before it was like, Joe's going to have a transplant at some point in the future. Don't know when. It's probably not going to be 20 years or 30 years. It's probably going to be 10. And long before we were engaged or anything like that, I was just going to be the one who's going to do it. And that was the end of that. Wow. And that's what carried through the whole way. Definitely some bumps along the way. And I wasn't a direct donor to Joe. We went through the kidney paired exchange, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But throughout it all, I was the one who's going to give the transplant, because it's just a special opportunity to have that. If it comes your way, you have to jump to it. And it's just a blessing to be able to make that gift.
Wow. I know my husband and we met in June of 2007. And then by July of 2008, I was a crash start onto hemodialysis with no prior knowledge of knowing about my kidney disease. And I was 24 at the time. So, that whole process of, we'd only dated a year, and this was a crash for both of us, that it was completely new for young people to be going through the surgeries and what was dialysis and body image as well. Like at one point I had 2 catheters in my body, and I've been dating my now husband for just over a year. So all of those things are coming forward. And, at that age, you're super self-conscious about everything anyways, as a 20-something-year-old. So then having this guy who was at first just another baseball player on a rec league team that I knew become my boyfriend. And then eventually down the line, we got married. But he immediately stepped up as a really big caregiver for me. And it was my mom who ended up being my donor. But throughout that process, when you go through something like that with somebody, you're so quickly bonded to them. And it's remarkable to see couples who are able to go through these really difficult times and still come out and be able to laugh at each other and mock each other and enjoy each other together. It's awesome to have the two of you here talking about this.
I'll jump in there. Your husband
Yeah.
sounds like a very wonderful and remarkable person to be that caregiver, because having experience with Brendan, who's with a remarkable Dr. Clooney, as we used to joke, also dating ourselves.
So I've got the beard for it now.
And even before we probably realized that it was related to my kidney decline, I would get sick. He would be the first one to be at my bedside, be so empathetic, almost too empathetic. He'd feel the pain too, and be competing with my mom about who was going to take care of me. So to have that support, I know we're truly lucky to find that in our life partners, and probably take it for granted that you automatically have this person who is thinking as much, if not more, about how you're feeling than you are. And another little tidbit is what you're saying about body image, but also to link to our Great Actions Leave a Mark campaign that's going to be launching during Living Donation Week. I have a second belly button because of my left nephrectomy as a 5-year-old. I don't know why, I never asked. I'm sure I asked at the time, but there's a incision scar below my original belly button. So my party piece of those get to know each other, what so many people didn't know about you, 2 belly buttons, and I would like adjust my shirt to be able to show it. So of course Brendan knew, because that would be the icebreaker of what makes you unique, and like, why do you have 2 belly buttons?
That is hilarious. There's the new title of our episode, 2 belly buttons, right? Yeah, but yeah, I can't echo enough what you said. We are incredibly lucky to have the partners that we do who are there with us. And my mom was the same. I was in university, so I moved back home while I was doing dialysis, and often my husband Mike would stay over, and sometimes in the middle of the night with peritoneal dialysis, there would be like pains from if the machine pulled too much fluid, or I'd have leg cramps, and like all of those things that would happen. So I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and either my mom would rush in and Mike would be like, "It's okay, I got her." And then sometimes she'd be like, "Oh, okay." But you could tell that she was like, I'm mom, what's going on here? But yeah, we're very lucky to have the partners that we do. You talked a little bit about that journey and knowing that eventually you would need a transplant. At what point were you told that transplant was coming sooner than you thought, and you're going to have to start to prepare for this?
So a little after we got married, I guess in and around when I turned 30, my kidney function that had been very slowly stable or slightly deteriorating, but not really, started to accelerate its deterioration, where I moved from the nephrology clinic to the multi-kidney clinics, or the MCKC clinics, where you see the dietitian and the pharmacist and have to more actively manage your illness. And so that happened, let's say, in and around when I was 30 and the few years after that. But it was a slow process, because it really just was my creatinine was creeping up, and I guess I would call that there was just an additional scarring on my kidney. I did everything from managing your diet, or the potassium diet that all of us have lived on, which is actually horrific because you're not allowed to eat anything that we've been told is healthy. Any amount of white rice and white bread is your friend.
Yes.
And lived with that and learned how to manage that phase where my function was deteriorating more than it had ever been, but was still slow enough that it did give us time to have conversations. But I remember my first day at that clinic, and the team was fantastic. But one of the things they do is they give you a tour of a dialysis unit. And of course I knew about dialysis, but because I had lived with it being so at bay, that was never something I got my head around. And I remember thinking, this is wonderful that that's a treatment, because so many other organ diseases don't have that. But I'm also lucky because I am in a slow decline. It's not a crash course like you've experienced, which is heartbreaking for me to hear, because I had the opposite experience of knowing that I had that option, but hoping that I could steer it towards, if it was going to get to the failure stage, steer it towards a preemptive transplant. So from my first day in the MCKC clinics, that was my goal. And that was something that was my biggest motivation, was how do I keep what I have and manage what I have? And at the time I thought, how do I keep what I have for as long as possible? And then when the time would come and you hit that, okay, now you're ready to be worked up, hopefully have a very efficient process to preemptively get a transplant. And what I thought was, this is pretty common. This is actually what a lot of people would experience. What I then quickly realized was I'm unique by being able to go the preemptive path, and that I learned that it's not like that for many people who need a kidney transplant. So that was a humbling experience that reminded me even more so to stay the course and make sure that I remain healthy enough to continue to do that. Which in the end, it did work out that I was able to preemptively get a kidney, but there was some bumps on the way. There absolutely was some bumps along the way.
And so people who don't know about preemptive transplants, can you explain to them what that would be?
So as your kidney reaches, obviously I work with your nephrologist, but as your kidney reaches a certain level, for me, once I around the 20% function level, was, all right, let's look at what your options are. You're already in the multidisciplinary clinic. You already have lots of people managing you, but say, okay, learn about your dialysis options, but also learn about transplant and what does that look like? And who in your life might be someone who would consider donating a kidney. You learn very quickly around the wait lists, around the deceased organ wait list. And that, for us, we were a bit surprised that was the focus, that there's an 8-year waiting list, for example, with my blood type. That's what they thought I would be. And therefore there's dialysis, because that's a really long time, or there's living transplant if you have someone who might want to do it. And so obviously we went down that path. And I, again, have been very lucky that Brendan was true to my form at Sick Kids. I brought people to my adult kidney appointments. So either Brendan came almost all the time, which is wonderful. Sometimes towards the end, my dad even came to start to better understand the process of transplant. So I had people with me hearing from the very beginning that living donation was an option. And that allowed me to never have to make the ask.
And that's such an incredible thing for people to hear, because I think often the first thing that people think when they hear living donation is, how do I ask? I can't ask somebody to do something like that. So knowing that as a potential recipient, that there are these people who are coming with you to hear about the benefits and how it's going to save your life, that is a great way for them to know all of that. And then also, was there anything else that you did outside of having Brendan and your dad at the appointments? Did you share what you were going through with your close family or your friends?
Yeah, I've talked about it quite openly. I think having someone like your loved one, and maybe it's a different person if you have, like in my situation, I had my parents, I had Brendan and my siblings, to also hear from the appointments what you're living with, because we often hear that kidney disease is a bit of a hidden disease. Now dialysis is different because you're obviously going to a center, or you're having it at home overnight. But in my case, you couldn't see that I was living in end-stage kidney disease. And I was very healthy the whole time, relatively. I had a bad kidney, but really healthy overall. So you wouldn't necessarily know, or even I wouldn't sometimes know my symptoms were correlated. It would take Brendan sort of living with me, being at the appointments, to say, that's related. Like, this isn't some random foot pain you have, it's gout. Or so I think having people involved in managing your health is really helpful, because it's not a very obvious illness. And then from there, the question of transplant becomes very, very seamless. But in terms of, in addition to Brendan, I also talked about it with my family, and I talked about it with some close friends. So people were very much aware, and I had others offer to start the process. Because Brendan was so amazingly adamant that it was going to be him, the team also saw that. They saw him be there with me. They saw my family also be there with me. So they said, one of the criteria for being a living donor is your enthusiasm. And so Brendan's enthusiasm, he wore that on his sleeve, or whatever the expression is.
Yeah.
You wear your heart on your sleeve. Brendan wore his donation, his want to donate on his sleeve. So that made the process that much easier for me to navigate, because he really navigated it for me.
Yeah, exactly. It was fairly clear sailing really until 2016. And I was a match and everything was going to be perfect. And then we were going through the HLA testing, which is the genetic testing to determine matchability. And just something changed over time. And that sometimes this happens. And then all of a sudden I wasn't a match, and Joe would reject 5 out of every 6 kidneys. So that was a huge speed bump for us. And that's when we actually learned about the kidney paradigm. Well, actually, first we were directed towards, okay, now you're on the deceased donor list. It's going to be about 8 years. And we said, nope, there's got to be other options out there. And we were quickly, but not maybe immediately, directed to the kidney paired exchange. And that was a pretty like an interesting moment, because you're so geared up to donate to your loved one that all of a sudden you're presented with, you'll donate anonymously to somebody you don't know. It could be on the other side of the country, and your loved one will get a kidney from someone else. And that seems fine, but there is like a weird moment where you're like, I'm donating to my loved one. But I think one of the things is, once we got into the kidney paired exchange, really learning about it and having basically board calls, Joe's dad and I really putting the doctors through their paces in terms of the statistics and probabilities and everything, we realized pretty quickly on that this is actually as good an option, maybe better than me donating to Joe directly. And it was really simply, if you want something to read, it's better to go into a library than hopefully find a book along the way. And it was pretty amazing, because you realize with 160 pairs across the country that the chances of getting a perfect match or a near perfect match for Joe were just dramatically higher. So John and I, Joe's dad, worked the statistics, worked the spreadsheets, and said, this is actually a really cool option. And so we went down that path from there, and a really fascinating process that ended up getting Joe a perfect kidney at the end of the day.
With all that math, we had the most amazing teacher through it, Dr. Catherine Tinkham. We met her at the perfect moment at this phase where it had all been smooth sailing, and kudos to the team who got us through the smooth sailing. And then we had this major hiccup, and it was that moment of, now there's an 8-year waiting list. I'm assuming I have to start dialysis. No idea. And like, no point in my mom and my dad and my sisters and my brother and my friends going forward, because I was just gonna be so hard to match. That didn't make any sense to us. We were, for the first time, quite stressed about the situation, because everything else had been smooth sailing because of the great care team we had and my health. But we met Dr. Tinkham, and she, in one, literally she did it in one 5-minute conversation, helped put all of those questions at ease and explained the paired exchange. And we looked to her and said, when can we start doing this? And why didn't we learn about this sooner? It sounds like the most amazing thing. And she really took the time to explain the math to us and to do the board presentation, as Brendan called it, and talk us through how really it's like market theory, or Brendan's library analogy. And now when people are facing sort of similar hurdles and I hear from them, rightly or wrong, like, you have to talk to Dr. Tinkham. And now there's a team as well, of course, at the Ajmera Transplant Centre, who are all equally capable of talking through it. But it really showed us, that was our first glimpse into how innovative the UHN transplant team is. if you're a not interesting case, you maybe never see it because things go so smoothly. But if you're slightly interesting, which you never want to be in healthcare, but if you are,
Yes.
we were very lucky to be at UHN, who sort of helms this paired exchange across the country and was part of bringing it to Canada and innovating it with Canadian Blood Services. So we are forever grateful that this program exists and that we learned about it at the right time. We felt at the time almost too late, but it ended up being the perfect time. And that's why we're committed to talking about it as much as we can, because more people need to know about it for sure.
Mm-hmm. And so through that process, again, for people who may not know about the paired exchange, you, Brendan, donated your kidney to a stranger somewhere across Canada.
Yeah.
And then in turn, a stranger, whether it was a direct match or how many people were in the chain, then donated their kidney to Joanne. And did you guys ever find out how many were in your chain?
No, not specifically, but yeah, and just like a little bit more detail. So there's 3 matches a year, June, October, and I think February. And basically there's between 140 and 160 pairs. So 160 recipients, 160 donors. And then often altruistic donors who actually feed into the paired exchange as well. And they're like superchargers, right? They can really make these chains work a lot more efficiently and effectively. Every 3 times a year, basically this massive set of data, HLA numbers, blood types, everything else goes into these algorithmic supercomputers basically. And then they put out the best potential chains of donor groups that match as many people as possible. And then that's reviewed by the transplant team to make sure that there's no other reasons why things shouldn't happen in a different way. From our experience, we went in there with the math, and it was a 1 in 6 chance at 160 pairs. So therefore, you've got about 25 pairs or so that are going to work. And it wasn't actually, we actually missed the first one, and which was a bit weird because we're like, the math says we must get in 160 pairs, there has to be a match. So that was a bit of a surprise in kind of October of 2016. But then it was at the end of January of 2017. It was a Friday, and I got a call from the hospital, from the transplant team, saying, we've got a perfect match for Joe. Your kidney is going to be an amazing match for another recipient. Surgery's in 3 weeks. Wow. And Joe got the same call about just before that or just after that. So we called each other, and we're like, February's a really busy month. We've got conferences. I got all these meetings. We got to go to Florida. And that conversation went on for about 30 seconds. And we're like, this is completely ridiculous. Drop all tools, call the office. We got better things to do. And it's one of those moments in life where you're so blessed when you can go into a situation and there's absolutely nothing more important you can do. And it's having a baby or getting married or often sadder occasions. But when the most important thing you can do is just sitting there in front of you and the path is so clear, drop everything and go for it. And I saw like my team around me were just amazing, that the way they stepped up, our friends, the way they stepped up, family and everything else. And just to have those moments in life when time just stops. It's, as a donor, that's why it's a weird phrase, and I've never really figured out. The gift is the blessing of the giver. And I've tried to figure out what that actually means, but in mine, the blessing is in the giving, and that comes back to the giver. And it was that incredible moment in time to just be with Joe, and it was like a second supercharged honeymoon. We were just February and March 2017, just watching. There was no time. It was just the two of us and getting better, and our moms taking great care of us, and it was amazing. And that's to see the transformation in Joe, and right, that's the importance of it. That's to see somebody who just weeks before was very sick, even though she was so strong that you never have known, all of a sudden be completely transformed was just an incredible. I was the one who won for sure, right? And then just having that time together was incredibly special as well.
Wow.
What Brendan is saying and what he experienced and what he continues to talk about was a huge surprise to me, that we are talked through what it's going to be like as a recipient. Of course, there's a lot of emphasis on the recipient, and then a little bit on the donor. We hope there's an increasing amount. So we knew what it was going to be like, but it's positioned as this huge ask, a big risk, and a selfless act, but it's also an imposition. What was very surprising for me is to see how much Brendan got out of it, because I always wondered, oh my gosh, I'm going to feel so indebted to him for doing the most amazing thing, and it's such a hardship for him. So together, seeing that he actually got something in addition to giving me this amazing second lease on life and all the time and energy we can spend together because of that. That's what we wanted, and that's what we expected, and that's been so amazing. But then seeing that other layer of impact on Brendan has been truly the most rewarding thing, which was completely unexpected.
From a recipient perspective, it's both heartbreaking and incredibly touching to be able to hear you speak, Brendan. I don't often get choked up. I'm quite good at that. Hearing it directly from you, I just hear love coming from you, and that incredible gift that you've given Joanne, and being able to continue your lives together in the way that you originally wanted to, because you donated a kidney through the paired exchange program. And knowing that impact, that forever recipients we're here because of our donors, and we're able to do not just the big things but also small things. Like for me, just waking up and feeling like I don't have to nap 10, 15, 20 minutes after I get out of a shower. Like all of these little things that you guys have done as donors, to also be able to hear from you that it's made such an impact in your life is just so beautiful. And thank you to you for that incredible gift that you gave to Joanne. And thank you to all donors, because as much as we say it often, you guys truly have given us our lives back. And it's amazing to be able to see how healthy Joanne is and how wonderful that surgery went for both of you.
As Brendan said, watching me feel so good and watching me have this new lease on life and this new energy is a question that I think you have when you are someone who's doing it preemptively, because you're trying to time the transplant as much as, of course, the system allows, and how your health is doing. But you're not living on dialysis. You don't have that element that Candace, you have great experience with. And you're also hoping that you're staying as healthy as you can. So you're creating at a certain level, you're all the different things that we watch for. Mm-hmm. So you wonder, am I going to feel better? Because while you're living with kidney disease and end-stage kidney disease, I still never associated with being sick. I had all these weird ailments that sort of I had to deal with, but I never associated as a person living with an illness. And so my worry was, I'll do this and I'll undertake this surgery. Brendan will have to go do something that sets him back for a period of time. And then I'll have to live on these immunosuppression drugs the rest of my life. So you wonder, and I have to say, that is not a consideration. Go do the transplant, because I instantly felt better. From the moment I woke up in the post-op room, where you half even remember if you're still all, you're in very much a bit of a day from the operation, from the anesthetic. And I remember, oh my gosh, the itchiness is gone. And I just lived with this underlying itchiness for years. And it had gotten more severe in later years as my decline had accelerated. And it just was, I got used to it. I was annoyed by it. Brendan would hear me complain about it all the time, but it was gone. And that was in the first seconds of me even just having a memory post-transplant, let alone how my recovery went. And so you learn how to live with kidney disease very well, and you don't realize how well you could feel. And that's the most amazing thing about transplant. It brings you back to 100%. Yeah, you have to live on some drugs, you manage that, but it brings you back to 100% where you haven't felt in years or maybe ever. And so I think people often consider, am I going to feel worse? There wasn't a day where I felt worse, even as I had to deal with the typical post-op recovery. I only ever felt better. And every day and every year, I think, wow, I still feel so amazing. And it still would take the time to remember that I didn't feel like this for a big part of my life.
Yes.
And that's all.
I'm with you on that. My creatinine, when I went into the emergency room hours after I had blood work done, when I crashed, was over 1200. And so I was walking around with 5 or under percent kidney function. And this had been present in my life, they think, for a good 10 years, but just was never caught by a family physician because, like you said, there were so many symptoms that could be attributed to other things. So my itchiness, it was psoriasis. And that's why I was itchy, because I had big patches of psoriasis, or I had food allergies, or I was low iron. And that's why I had, or low other things. That's why I had leg cramps or foot problems. And as a young person, all of these symptoms for kidney disease, like you said, could be attributed to other things. But then when I went on dialysis, my psoriasis went away. It was instantly gone because now that machine was cleaning my blood for me. And so that was the first step to feeling better, is that all of a sudden some of those symptoms are gone. And then transplant, like you, my first memory was waking up and saying, I can't believe how good I feel. Like, I'm in pain. Of course, it's a major surgery, but I couldn't believe how much energy I had and how good I felt. And I tell every person who says either I'm comfortable on dialysis, I don't want to think about transplant, or what was the difference? Even my worst day so far with my transplant is far better than my best day on dialysis. And it continues to be that way, even when I do have a bad flu or cold or any of that, that transplant truly is so transformative for us. It's amazing. So
It really is.
I'm going to ask you first, Joanne, since we've been chatting with you about your recovery and about the surgery. There's a lot of potential recipients who could have a transplant, but maybe are nervous about accepting a living donation. And they could be worried about what that impact is going to be on their loved one, or what the risks are. For somebody who might be on the fence about saying yes to someone who wants to be their donor, what would you say to them?
Talk to Brendan. Honestly, like, I think talk to these amazing people, Brendan, and you've done it many times, and I know every other donor I've met would be equally as willing. Talk to them. Listen to what they have to say, because you're going to be so in your own head about what you think you're asking, what you're managing, and what impact that's going to have, that you're assuming things that may not be there. And I think if you hear from people who've gone through this experience and what they've got out of it, it's wonderful. And I think it's almost talk more to a donor than another recipient, or find a couple or people, a group of people to talk to, because I think the more you hear about it, there's a lot of myths that can be busted, and there's a lot of clarity that can be offered. And there's one of the biggest things we struggled with was just the lack of certainty. And that was hard for me to watch Brendan, that he had a couple of years of uncertain time. Was the transplant going to be this year? Was it going to be this quarter, et cetera, et cetera? All of that can be helped addressed or minimized, at least through conversation. And so it's talking about people who've been through it, but also talk about people around you, so that it doesn't feel like you're having to ask, because you will find that humans can be remarkable people. They might just do it. They might just submit their questionnaire and they might move forward. So don't be afraid to talk to people around you about what you're going through, and talk to those that have been through it, because they'll have a lot of insight to share.
Amazing. And on that note, Brendan, on the donor side, if somebody's considering living donation, what would you share with them?
It's It's major surgery for sure. And Joe got a kidney. She has more kidneys than I do right now, I think.
So only one works though.
Yeah. So I've got 3 and only one of mine works.
Yeah. So it's major surgery, especially at Toronto General and especially in Canada, like some of the best surgeons in the world. You're in incredible hands. And for me, I took 2 weeks off work. I was back to work in the 3rd week, which was a little bit too soon, I would say. We had to come home early a couple of days, but then I was back swimming and playing squash.
Luckily, your team sent you home early. You had a wonderful team around you.
Yeah, but I was back. I was back playing squash and swimming after 6 weeks. I could have done it after 5 weeks. So that's not to say that every recovery is going to be the exact same, but it's one of those times where you just take the time to rest and you recover pretty effectively. And I would say I was a little bit more tired than usual for about 6 months, but then after that, absolutely fine. And now, over 5 years later, my kidney function and creatinine levels and everything else are pretty much normal. You really do bounce back very well, and just the reward is it's everything, right? And it's to have the opportunity to do it, I would recommend it to anybody. And going back to what Joe says about speaking as a recipient, looking for a donor, that's one of the things. Like, we were lucky. Like, I was there, I was ready to go, and it was just like a really clear path to follow. But one of the things is you look back and say, what about the people who they couldn't speak out? They didn't have anybody. It's horrible to think that, like, everybody has somebody who will step up and donate. Everybody does. But not everybody is informed well enough to know to ask, what to ask for. And that's the real thing that we've been working to change, and with your podcast as well, is just so that people know and understand like what their options are. And it's not a selfish ask at all, because you're giving somebody a great opportunity. And the more we can do to talk about that, make sure that people realize that they should ask. Nobody is going to be coerced into doing this. That's the thing that I think really hurt later on, realizing that people didn't have people to step up and who were too afraid to ask for it. So
I think that brings up a good point that I often talk to people about as well, is if you're uncomfortable sharing your story too, find somebody within your close circle who could be your advocate and who could tell that story for you. Because if you're going through something like this, there are people around you who want to help, and they may not be able to be your donor. They may not be able to donate blood, but there are things that they can do. They can help you share your story, and they can help through your journey as well. We had a very large community, and we have a very large family as well. So even through our journey, bringing over food or driving me to appointments or taking the dog for a walk if we just don't have the energy. So there's so many things that people can do to support other people while they're going through this. And if you're not comfortable asking, find somebody who could be that advocate for you to really share your story. Because as you said, Brendan, there are people out there who want to help. They just don't know that they can or how to. So both of you, through this incredible journey, have taken all of your knowledge and your experience, and the two of you pivoted and co-founded the Center for Living Organ Donation, which is where I work. So I'm wondering, from your perspectives, what was the driving force behind that decision? And why is it so important for the two of you to give back this way?
A few months after the surgeries, and we were talking about our experience and talking about what we went through and how lucky we are, Brendan talking about, as he just has, that how there's this loneliness around organ donation, that some people don't have someone or don't know how to make that ask or aren't able to make that work for them. And Brendan started talking a lot about how that was a really hard part, understanding some people that we met along the way, or that we learned through statistics, that there was just this huge amount of loneliness that we thought was so different from our experience. And we had such a tremendous, it had our hiccups along the way, but in the end, it had such a tremendous outcome that we said, how do we help more people have that outcome? And selfishly, I joke that every morning I thought I'm going to have to wake up and thank Brendan for giving me his kidney, and thanking the exchange donors and everybody, and be incredibly grateful as I am for this life that I have. But I also I like to be very action oriented. So how can we take that gratitude and take that amazing gift that Brendan did and try to pay it forward even more than the Parrot Exchange did? And we sat down with the team at UHN, who we gotten to know really closely, and start to understand their priorities, and sat down with our families and said, this is something that we want to try to get behind and try to just do our little part to basically have more people have the same amazing outcome we've had. Because there were hiccups along the way that I think with a little bit of maneuvering could be prevented. And we have the most amazing transplant hospital at our doorstep here in Ontario. And a lot of people don't know about it. So we need people to know about that, and we need to help them navigate it. And then if we have more people who can have our same outcomes, that helps the system. And it helps at so many different levels. So when the team brought us the concept of the Center for Living Organ Donation, we immediately loved it because it talked about patient care. It talked about the team around living donation. It talked about being a world-class leader and being a first, doing something comprehensive. And most importantly, for us and for our families, it puts Brendan and donors like him at the center of it, where sometimes they're not, because it's the recipients who are sick, and they take up the vast majority of the focus of the healthcare teams. So this center is about people like Brendan and making sure there's more people like Brendan for those that need it.
Amazing. And that's a beautiful love letter to our donors as well, to have that exist. It's remarkable.
Hopefully.
And for the two of you, what are your goals for the center, and just in general, the advocacy work that you do?
I think it's repetitive, but I think the goal really is to increase access and make sure that access is into everyone who needs it, no matter where you live in Canada, no matter who you are, no matter if you have a small network or a large network, that everyone has that same access to these amazing outcomes that we've all had here. And Dr. Tinkham, when we were talking about this in the early days, she's the mathematician she threw out a number. She said, if 1 in 10,000 Ontarians donated their kidney today, there'd be no wait list. And I thought, that's a tiny number, 1 in 10,000. That's easy to achieve, and let's make that happen. We can say our Hail Mary pass goal would be end the wait list. And in the meantime, it's just increase the amount of living donation, increase the amount of surgeries that are happening, and the more people that have access to it, because it leads to these amazing outcomes. And along the way, let's make the process a little bit more efficient and a little bit easier to navigate, both from a system perspective and from having these conversations, because they both matter. Because it's so much around, these conversations are incredibly important in the journey. And then so is making the system a bit more efficient so that more people have access to it. So we end the wait list. I think that's the vision.
Amazing. That's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, Joanne and Brendan, for sharing your personal journey with us, and for sharing a lot of your passion and what you have put into the center and your advocacy work. And I'm incredibly grateful for having the two of you as our co-founders and being able to join your team this year. So looking forward to all of the amazing things that we're going to do together. Thinking about that big vision that you've just laid out, I'm very happy to have Dr. Humar join us so we can continue this conversation on the large scale. And Joanne, if you would like to introduce our new guest, Dr. Humar.
I think everyone knows Dr. Humar. Not only is Dr. Humar the head honcho, he's also infectious disease researcher and physician, and is leading the world in a lot of transplant-related infectious disease research. And in his time as the head of the Ajmera Transplant Centre, correct me if I'm wrong, doctor, but I think it has moved from a very good transplant center to the best in the world, in my opinion, or officially ranked the largest transplant center in North America and a top 3 research center, competing against the likes of Harvard and Johns Hopkins, and I'm assuming the Mayo Clinic, but we're up there, we're advancing them, and it is incredibly amazing to see it all under your leadership, Dr. Humar, and the amazing team you have there over at UHN. Welcome.
Thanks. Thank you.
So, Dr. Humar, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about your role at the Ajmera Transplant Centre.
I'm privileged to be in a leadership position in the transplant program. It is, as Joanne mentioned, a very unique and comprehensive organ transplant program. We do about between 600 to 700 transplants per year, which makes us one of the largest in North America. It includes liver, kidney, heart, lung, pancreas, small bowel transplants. Recently, we launched an islet transplant program as well. And it's a big team effort. You can't do this without a huge team. And we have over 600 people working in the transplant program. So it includes physicians and surgeons and nurses and pharmacists, a huge group of researchers that work closely with the clinical folks, and many more people.
Why did you pursue a career in transplant medicine?
Oh, I've actually always been fascinated by organ transplantation. And actually, even when I was very early in my medical career, I was really amazed at the profound and transformative impact that a transplant can have on a patient. And very early during my training, I had seen a few patients that were actually really quite close to death's door and had been completely turned around by an organ transplant. And I thought, okay, this is a field I ultimately want to end up in. And then as time went on, I also realized that on the research side, it was very cool because it was really on the cutting edge of modern medicine. And really what attracted me to transplantation even more is that I saw these huge opportunities for some really groundbreaking scientific research. So all of those things, I decided very early in my career that ultimately I wanted to play some role in the transplant program, preferably at UHN.
Along with your leadership position, you also have an active program of research. So what are you working on right now? What's top of your mind?
Yeah.
COVID obviously being a real hot topic over the past few years or so. How has that worked with your research in transplant?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. COVID has been a really important area for us recently, obviously, as it has for many people. One of the key I guess you could call it the Achilles heel of transplantation, is that we need to give patients immunosuppression in order to prevent rejection of the organ. And what that does is it really knocks down the immune system. So it places our patients at unique risk for serious infections. The goal of my own research lab, and I work very closely with a group of other people, including my wife, has been to really develop ways to better prevent and treat infection in transplant patients. And then this kind of very nicely fit into helping solve the problem of COVID in transplant patients. And really, very early on, we realized that it was a pretty serious disease in transplant patients, more so than in the general population. And some of our early research and research that others had done had shown the standard 2 doses of vaccine that everybody was getting was just not working in transplant patients. They were still getting really sick and coming into hospital. So at that point, we thought, okay, how can we help solve this? And we did really the first randomized trial to look at a 3rd dose booster in transplant patients. And the trial was very convincing. It was a slam dunk that the booster made a huge difference for transplant patients. And we were fortunate enough to publish that, but the FDA and the CDC and a bunch of other authorities became very interested, and we shared all our work with them very early on, even before it was published. And the cool thing was that the data actually directly led to a change in guidance around booster doses for immunocompromised people. And this was really cool for us as researchers because you don't often see that there's this immediate and profound impact on the way things are done. And it had an impact all over the world. And I actually had hundreds of patients from all over the place emailing me and thanking me for, or thanking UHN for doing this type of research. So it was a pretty gratifying experience.
I'm so glad that people reach out to you to thank you, because you're often, you and Dr. Kumar are both so humble in this achievement. And I always say as often as I can that thank you. As transplant recipient patients of UHN, I just felt like there was these amazing, like this, we were being looked out for. We had you and your team in our corner, and you were doing everything you could to protect us as best as you could. And it was profound, the impact that you had. And then not only on me and on Candace and on our fellow patients, but on the whole community at large. So I'm glad people around the world have recognized that effort, because we can often take the work that researchers do for granted. And it was so amazing to see, and to see that it was you and Dr. Kumar leading that, and Toronto having this huge impact. So
yeah,
congratulations.
Yeah. And there's still a lot of work to do. We never back then thought that we would still be dealing with COVID, unfortunately, but so there's still a lot of work to do, but we're in a much better place, I think, than we were a couple of years ago.
I know when we first heard about COVID, my husband wanted us to go into isolation about 2 weeks before the NBA shut down, and felt like once the NBA shut down, the whole world did. Right? They're like, oh, no sports? Okay, this is serious. And I was annoyed with him. And I said, oh, you're being too cautious. I'm fine. I just won't go to big social events. And he said, no, this is serious and we need to go into isolation. So we did about 2 weeks before the rest of the world shut down. And I remember thinking, I can't do this for that long. This is a really scary thing. And so in my head, I was breaking it up into these like little 2-week chunks, because I thought, I can do anything for 2 weeks. And years later, we're still talking about this. But right when I got my vaccine, it was the first breath that I had taken in a long time, in feeling like that change was coming. And Joanne said that there were people out there who were advocating for us and that had our backs. And now I'm on my 5th dose. And I have also spoken with my nephrologist about Evusheld. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, and how is that supporting transplant patients too?
Sure. Evusheld is a different way to prevent. Instead of giving a vaccine to allow the patient's immune system to make antibodies, you're just directly giving the antibodies, and it's a long-lasting antibody. And so we have been administering that to our transplant patients, and we're actually doing some research on how effective it is, because we don't really know how well it'll work against the BA.5 variant, which is the one that's currently circulating. So we are looking at that. The more tools we have in our arsenal for this, the better it is. And as the virus keeps changing, we got to keep changing, and we got to keep evolving and making sure we're on top of it. Because, you're right, it has a profound impact on all of us, but especially our patients, especially you guys, and you need to be extra careful, extra cautious, and we got to make sure that it's not, that you can still live a normal life.
I got the shield shots a couple weeks before I did some traveling this summer, and it was painless, seamless, really efficient process. Good. It was recommended to me by the experts, so I felt it was great to have yet another tool. I have to make sure I'm in that research project. I'll email the team. I loved being part of your vaccine one. I was probably too eager. What are my test results?
Yeah. That's fantastic. I'm wondering too, if there has been any transplants happen with COVID positive people, or if that is a hard stop for transplants, if you're positive that process is stopped.
Yeah, that's a good question. And initially in the pandemic, if either the donor or recipient was COVID positive, it was a hard stop, and things have evolved quite a bit since then. So now we're pretty routinely using organs from donors who are COVID positive, with the exception of lungs. But for example, livers and kidneys from deceased donors who are COVID positive, we're pretty routinely using, and we have excellent outcomes. We haven't had any problems with transmission. And then on the recipient side, if they have active COVID, they're not able to get a transplant, but as soon as they're recovered, and it usually takes a few weeks or up to about a month, we can pretty safely have them undergo transplant, and they do quite well. So things are evolving, and we're learning as we go along with the rest of the global transplant community.
Right. Amazing.
To maybe pivot from there, because I think what you're doing with the COVID positive organs that you're now transplanting is part of your innovation in organ transplant. Dr. Humar, I've had a lot of opportunities to listen to you present about the mission of the Ajmera Transplant Centre and be a small part of those presentations. And I'm always very excited by the overall vision, which is leading the world in transplant by improving access to transplantation, leading innovation through things like organ repair, regeneration, and replacement, and recruiting the best of the best to UHN to continue to grow into that role as this world-leading program. In my opinion, you've already achieved that, and it's only up from here, but I know it takes a lot of effort, and I know it's a big part of your job and the job of the 600 people every day. So can you talk us a little bit more about this mission and how you are going about achieving it, and how are you, as you do that, improving care for the patients that have a transplant in their future and are living with transplant?
Yeah, to me, that mission is really what excites me, right? Like, it's what gets me going, what I think has huge potential still. And it's very kind of you to say that we've achieved that mission, but I actually feel like we've accomplished a lot. I totally agree with that, but we have a long way to go. We still have long waiting lists of patients who need a transplant. We have some who unfortunately don't get to transplant. And we do have patients who develop complications related to the transplant or to the use of the anti-rejection medication. So we have a lot of problems that we need to solve, but I'm pretty confident over time, and research takes time, and especially clinical translation takes a lot of time, but I'm confident over time we can solve those. And I think what's exciting for us is really that there's going to be a lot of innovation taking place in medicine over the next couple of decades. And I think really transplantation can be right at the center of that. So if you look at some of the technologies coming down the pipeline, things like stem cell therapy, gene therapy, artificial intelligence, a whole bunch of other things, all those can really intersect to really transform like the way we're delivering medicine. And I really feel that us as a transplant program and us as transplant researchers and clinicians can be right at the center and at the forefront of that. So I think it's a pretty exciting time for us and for the field in general.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of transformation, UHN was recently awarded that 24 million New Frontiers grant to advance transplant research. We've touched base a tiny bit in a past episode about ex vivo, but I'm wondering if you could talk about that New Frontiers grant and what that is, and also a little bit about what ex vivo is and how that could potentially change.
We were super excited to get that grant. That was a team grant for the transplant program, and there was over 400 people that had applied for a very small number of grants, and we're, I think, pretty fortunate to get that. So the grant is focused on ex vivo, and that's really where you take an organ, for example, from a deceased donor, and you provide it outside the body, you provide it nutrients and oxygen, and you're able to assess that organ outside the body, just like you would assess a patient, for example. And I think the really cool part and the transformative part is that beyond just assessing the organ, you have an opportunity to really modify that organ, to treat that organ. So you can use methods like gene therapy, or you can administer antibiotics or antivirals. You can administer certain kind of cells to modify the organ. And you can almost try to create these super organs, or organs that are not only better matched to a recipient, but actually will function better and be resistant to rejection, be resistant to infection. And that's where we really want to go. And that, if we can get to even half of what we proposed in that grant, it's going to just totally transform how organ transplantation is done.
Wow, that's remarkable.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And don't worry, Brendan, you did have a super organ without all that.
He didn't eat any ex vivo. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what would that do for, Joanne's talked about the wait list and how many people are waiting, and the fact that only about 35% of Ontarians are registered organ donors. And we know that often even those remarkable donors who do register their consent, sometimes their organs are not viable to be used. And so would that kind of expand that pool of organs that would be available for recipients?
Yeah, totally. Like our kind of transformational goal, and it's a stretch goal, but we want to eliminate the wait list. That's what we want to do. There's different ways to get there, and I think we have to tackle all those ways. One is to increase the number of donors, whether that's living donors or deceased donors, and there's a bunch of ways to do that. But another way is to increase the utilization of organs that we get offered. So this whole area of ex vivo repair and modification tackles that second part of it. And that doesn't mean we don't need to tackle the first part. We still need to tackle the first part. We need more organ donors, either deceased donors or living donors. And there's lots of ways to do that. And we're working on that part as well. And Joanne's actually actively involved in that part as well.
I think that you're right. Like the Center for Living Organ Donation, with part in design is to optimize living donation. And I'm often asked, if all things were equal, would you choose a deceased organ or would you choose a living? And I think that's a really interesting question, because people think, well, this should be easy. Just do presumed consent, or just put all your focus on having more people sign their organ donor cards. And what I've learned that we have lots of organs, it's just whether they're viable, which is then what led us really, in addition to how amazing it was for us and what Brendan did, say, okay, there really is this world that living transplant not only just tackles the wait list, it also leads to better outcomes right now.
Yeah.
Is that a fair statement?
It's a completely fair statement, actually. Especially for kidney transplantation, the long-term outcomes really are better with living donation. Until we can get the long-term outcomes with deceased donation, at least as good as living donation, then my preference would be a live donor kidney in that setting.
Is it the same on the liver side? Is the benefit similar?
Yeah, the liver side is a little bit different, because there the outcomes are actually still better with living donation, but the reason is because there's not enough livers, right? So often, unfortunately, those people waiting for a deceased donor, they either get really sick or they actually pass away before they even get to a transplant. And that's why the outcomes are better with living donor liver. But if we had enough deceased donor livers, I think that would be our preference in that setting.
Mm-hmm. And is that too because that surgery is a little bit more risky for liver donors than it is kidney donors?
Yeah, it's a pretty complex operation, but we've managed to do it very safely, and knock on wood, we've had excellent outcomes in our donors. But the reason that we've made a big push in living donor liver transplantation is because of a shortage of deceased donors.
Wow. And so thinking about all of these amazing innovations, I heard you mention AI. And I know a lot of people in our world are fascinated by any kind of tech that could be used to advance healthcare. What would be those AI interventions that could support transplant?
I think it's in its infancy right now, but you can imagine, for example, really complex matching algorithms that can be used, and even we're doing things like paired exchange, and of course Joanne was involved in a paired exchange, but you can have very complex paired exchange algorithms across the country or even across the continent, for example, that can be driven by very precise matching tools and things like that. So there's a lot of potential for these kind of AI driven or even complex computational algorithms to help in that kind of decision making. And then even on the post-transplant side, our patients can be very complex with a lot of different things going on, and tools that can help physicians kind of navigate through that complexity could really help make a difference, I think.
Mm-hmm.
What always strikes me is the pace of change. Sometimes it feels, we talk about these huge innovations that might be 20 years off from a clinical setting, but then Brendan and I are often reminded that what we did, the paired exchange, really only started to be a common and still not very common option, around 2009, 2010. So at our transplant 2017, that if I had gone into organ failure a decade earlier, we wouldn't have had that option, and it would have very different outcomes for us. And so then in that way, the pace of change is actually quite fast. And that really excites me, being involved with the UHN's transplant program, or should I need something in the future, who knows what it's going to look like, or you have a vision, but it's this tremendous time to be in medicine when there's so much hope, when you're in this field where it really is defined as giving hope and a second chance at life. So it is very exciting. Do you think it's going to look very different 20 years from now than it is today?
Yeah, I think actually I don't know what it's going to look like, and that's part of the excitement, because it's going to be totally different. I can tell you that. Even 10 years from now, it'll be very different, but 20 years from now, it's going to be totally different. And it's going to be, I think, very exciting and very good for our patients. And I would say even in the last 5 years, I've watched things change a lot in our program. Like, we're pretty routinely using ex vivo. We've doubled the number of lung transplants. We've increased the number of liver transplants by over 30% using some of these technologies. We're very routinely using hepatitis C positive donors, which we never would have done in the past. With COVID, we're using donors that have COVID, which we wouldn't have even thought of doing 2 years ago. So things change very quickly, and it's all change for the good. It's all change that helps people. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing what's around the corner.
Mm-hmm. My great-grandmother had a pig valve in her heart for quite a long time, and she lived with it very successfully. And this was when this was probably 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago that she had it. That has also been a big interest of a lot of people, is that idea. And I'm wondering if there's any insight into if that would ever be an option for transplant, like organs like kidneys, livers.
Yeah, it's a good question. So that's called xenotransplantation. And there's actually, because of a recent xeno heart that was done in the United States, there's been a renewed interest and excitement in that field. And I think there are a lot of immunological barriers to xenotransplantation, but if those can be overcome, it's a potentially pretty revolutionary development in transplantation. And as I said, there's all these kind of competing technologies going on, like stem cells, and xenotransplant is another one, gene therapy is another one. And which of these will be the solution, or will it be a combination of these types of things that will be a solution? But regardless, all of these things are going to really pretty dramatically change the way we deliver care. So
I know another thing, thinking about how things have changed so quickly. My grandmother had a kidney transplant when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I remember her taking these mass amounts of immunosuppressants. And today I take 3 types of medications for my transplant. when I decided that I was going to plan a family, I didn't have to change my medication. The changes that have come and how much easier it is for me than it was for my grandmother. I know you've done some research in immunosuppressants. Would that be something for us recipients to look forward to in the future that could continue to be reduced?
Yeah, so I'm very pleased to hear that it's much better for you than it was for your grandmother.
Mm.
So, that whole area of research is called tolerance, and it's always been the holy grail of transplantation is to try to induce tolerance, meaning allowing patients to come off of immunosuppression completely.
Wow.
That would be wonderful.
Mm.
We've got a huge research interest in that throughout our transplant program. We have a number of investigators working either in the lab with cells or working on animal models or working on clinical trials in that area. And there's a lot of different avenues to try to induce tolerance in patients. There's a lot of different approaches you can take. One of the ones we're really excited about is if we can use specific types of immune cells called regulatory cells, which as the name sounds, they regulate the immune system and can hopefully prevent rejection without the need for taking anti-rejection drugs. So this is kind of a very active area of research. It's a few years away. People have been working on tolerance since we started doing transplantation 50 years ago. So it's a challenging thing, right? Because you're getting an organ from somebody else, and to try to trick your immune system into not rejecting it it's a pretty high bar. But we've made progress, and I'm pretty confident that we will continue to make progress and we'll get there.
And so, doctor, on the induced tolerance, is it at the time of transplant, the incoming organ has to be induced, or the immune system has to be induced to be tolerant? Or do you think there's a possibility that transplants that were done 5 years ago, for example, that the immune systems could then actually be induced to be tolerant?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've got research ongoing looking at both of those things. So right from the time of transplantation, whether you either modify the organ, and that's where the ex vivo piece comes in. So the organ is more tolerogenic, or you modify the recipient's immune system. But we've also got some ideas of looking at the second scenario you described, patients who are longer term, and looking, for example, at if you could give a cell infusion of regulatory cells in that setting, and then wean the patient off immunosuppression completely, or maybe not even completely, maybe mostly. We think that would be a huge advance as well. So we've got active research going on in both of those scenarios that you propose.
And following on from that as well, the RNA vaccines that have been so effective against COVID, is that feeding into some of these treatments at all, like that new technology?
Yeah, not so much, because the vaccines are primarily to boost the immune response. And we haven't so much been looking at RNA technology. There are ways to look at mRNA technology where you can trick the immune system by creating certain proteins by delivering mRNA. And but that area of research is, I think, pretty early on, although there's been a lot of excitement because of the success of these mRNA vaccines. So we'll see. It's a really good question, and I think that field has got a renewed excitement after being around. The mRNA field has been around for many years, but it's suddenly people are seeing that there's actually pretty huge potential to that field.
I think that's great to hear too, because often some of the feedback that I heard from people just directly outside of my circle was a fear of the COVID vaccine because it was so brand new and this technology is too new. But I have friends who are scientists and do work in the field who have said it's not new technology. It's a new virus, but the technology has been around for a very long time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also I would add, if you count up all the doses of these mRNA vaccines that have been given, it's probably like 8 to 10 billion doses worldwide, which is way more than any other vaccine ever given. So I think we've got enough data to say they're pretty safe, right?
Yes, yes, that's amazing.
There's a lot to get excited for and look out for in the future of transplant. I'd love to go back to something you said a little bit earlier, Dr. Humar, around some of today's realities. And while it's an amazing program, there is still some challenges that patients face and that you and your team have to navigate. Mainly, from what I understand, it's really like a shortage of organs, and that's why there is a wait list. It may be a shortage of organs and like the system capacity. So what can be done at a systems level to try to relieve some of those barriers? And I'll also pose that question in the context of we have a government with a new mandate, a strong mandate that they're here for 4 years. And healthcare is obviously the number one topic of this government's mandate because it needs to be, and because of COVID and what the state of the system. So what can we do to be realistic and relieve some of these challenges? And what can we do partnering with government, or what can government do to try to help programs like relieve these challenges so we can achieve these grandiose goals, which also include making it more efficient and making it an easier process and getting more done in your ORs and through your medical teams. So what do you think? Let's talk the system level.
That's a big question.
Yeah,
right?
It's probably a whole different podcast. So maybe we could just answer as a teaser.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that can be done. If we just tackle the donation part of it, okay, and if we just maybe look at deceased donors, there's a lot of potential to increase the number of deceased donors. And the way you tackle that is really the government has to put an investment in deceased donation, which they have done, but there's a lot more that they could do. Building this kind of culture of donation in the community through awareness and education is really helpful. And then legislation like presumed consent, for example, is also helpful. Increasing resources to donor hospitals in the ICU so that there's donation champions in every ICU, that kind of thing helps. So all of those, I think, could actually go a long way to increase the number of available organs. And then to match that, they'd have to put more investment on the transplantation side, right? We'd need investment in operating rooms and beds and critical care capacity, all of those, to be able to carry out that transplant activity, which we're more than ready to do, actually. That would be a dream come true for us if we could do 2,000-3,000 transplants a year. That would be fantastic, but we need that investment in infrastructure and people to be able to do that.
And what about it? So you touched on deceased donation, you touched on government investment and in expanding the system capability. On the living transplant side, which is one of the current ways to try to augment the organ shortage, what can we do? Is there ways that we can consider with government's help or policy incentivizing living donation or making it easier for them? Or there's the voucher system, which is donate today, but if your loved one needs one in 10 years, they go to the top of the list. What's being done what could be done on the policy level to enable living donation to also play its part in an expanding capacity?
Yeah, I think living donation is hugely important, and there's almost unlimited potential to grow living donation. And I think there's a lot that can be done, but there's other things that we just haven't thought about. We need to really brainstorm around. But one of the key things is maybe not incentivizing. We really don't want to pay or pressure living donors in any way, but at least we have to remove any disincentives. So but there is a cost to being a living donor. You're off work for a period of time. There may be other financial limitations. There might be may need to look after other family members or things like that. So there is a cost, and we have to really make a concerted effort to remove any disincentives to living donation, to make the process as easy as possible for those people who are really doing an amazing thing. So,
and I think a lot of us bring up the one-day donor workup that happened in Ireland as like a pipe dream, perhaps, or just something that we've heard of that would be so remarkable. When I mentioned it in passing to my mom, who is my donor, and she was so enthusiastic about getting the tests done that from start to finish, she was about 7 months. And we were even told that was really fast because she asked people to call her if there were cancellations. And she was just really on top of everything, wanting to be my donor enthusiastically like you, Brendan. So have we ever thought about trying that one donor day workup, or has that been looked at from Ireland?
Yeah, it's a good question because we have tried that, and it's been a goal of mine to have an expedited workup process. And it does occur at many centers, and I can tell you, I've spoken to colleagues in the US where it does actually occur. And I think the reality is, to be blunt, is we're in a very resource limited healthcare setting that prevents us from doing that, even when we want to. There's some situations where we may not want to do that, where we want to give the donor time to think about it before they donate, but there's clearly situations donors would very much appreciate. They come to the hospital one day and they see everybody they need to get, they get every test they need to get, and then they're done. And then they can think about it all they want before the surgery, but at least they're done all their testing. I think it needs some investment from the government to make that a reality, but we'd certainly be happy to do that.
The good news is you can do it in the liver, on the liver side, quite efficiently, given the health circumstances. So you have a model when the kidney world can shift and follow when ready.
Yeah, we can do it. Yeah, as you say, the will is there, and we know how to do it. It's just, we don't have sufficient resources to do it, really.
And then thinking about, the differences at UHN and some of the innovations that have come forward directly from your team. I had a gentleman approach me who was one of the first people to receive a kidney transplant from a woman that he didn't know. And this happened quite a while back, but we've focused on his story and shared that on our social media. And he over and over talked about how grateful he was to UHN for being open to this innovation. And then also talked about how incredible it is that there are these altruistic donors who come forward. And I know in many countries that's not legal, that your donor has to actually be related for them to allow that process. But the case for altruism at UHN, we have a remarkable number of donors who on the liver and the kidney side have stepped forward to donate. And we have a couple people on our committees who have done both liver and kidney. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, when did that shift happen? And was that a thought process that came to be to increase living donation? And I'm sure there were a lot of ethics meetings that had to happen to make that happen. I guess there's no question there, just a thought of how remarkable the team is.
Yeah, not only that, but these donors are remarkable people, right? It's actually quite an amazing thing, and we're very supportive of the anonymous donor process. We do it very carefully. Just to make sure that the donors know what they're getting into, they know what's involved. And these people are just really amazing people, and it's actually helped a lot of recipients. Just last year, we did our 100th anonymous live donor liver transplant, which is more than anywhere in the world. So it's a huge accomplishment.
It's remarkable. Yep.
It
Amazing.
really is. Yeah. Wonderful people who do that.
Thank you so much, Joanne and Brendan, for your amazing advocacy work and for sharing your personal journey with us today. And Dr. Humar, we're so grateful to have you as a leader in creating such amazing change and driving innovation to save lives. So thank you all for joining me today. But I do have one final question for all of you that is not transplant related. If you listen to the podcast, you know that I always ask people, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? So I will start with Brendan.
Oh my God, I have to start.
That's a brutal question.
I'm so glad I listened to your podcast, so I knew this was coming.
Yeah.
Well, if you knew it was coming, Jojo, you can go first.
There you go.
Okay, I'll go first. You might have to help me out there, Brenda. My family has a family farm in Ireland that has been in our family for well over 150 years. And there are these stunning trees in some of the backfields that have been part of the land for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I'd say, Brendan, do you know what kind of trees they are?
I think they're oak trees.
They're
Big,
oak trees.
huge oak trees. Yeah.
Yeah, and their trunks are huge and they're so deeply rooted and they bring so much beauty to this farm. So I'd say that's the kind of tree I would be, standing strong and solid and very rooted in where I come from and rooted in family, because it has that these trees predate our family being there, and hopefully they add beauty and value to the land and everything that land does. So I hope that I aspire to do the same thing in my life. So I think that's what I am. The oak trees in our farm in Oldcastle, County Meath in Ireland.
And Brendan, how's that for a follow-up?
Oh man, I got nothing. I've never been out. You could ask me other questions, but there's one question I've never thought of.
I like to put people on the spot.
Yeah, I honestly got nothing. No.
We can go to Dr. Humar and you can keep thinking.
Okay.
You know what? I don't know too many different kinds of trees, but I guess I was maybe a Christmas tree.
Amazing.
That's a good one.
Yes.
It's a good symbol of hope, and they're always green. So
I love it. That's fantastic.
Yes, that hope correlates really nicely to the work that you do. The concept of hope and renewal and rebirth and whatnot. So that's a great one for your role in transplant, Dr. Humar.
thank you.
Yeah. All I can think of is a blue spruce, which is kind of like a Christmas tree as well. But that's all I can think of.
You learn so much about the person by what kind of tree they would like to be. So thank you for answering that to the best of your abilities after I put you on the spot like that. But again, I want to thank you all for being on the podcast today. We're so grateful for all the work you do. Thank you guys for
Thank you
coming.
so much.
Thank you for doing this, Candace. It's amazing work. I love listening to clearly, Brendan. I need to start sending you the latest season, because you just started the trees in this season.
Yes.
I love listening to them. I dedicate time. They're always full of emotion and information.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous part of the work of the center, and we're grateful that you do it.
Awesome.
Agreed.
All right. Thanks, everybody.